Okay, welcome everyone to the Tuesday evening class for the Sandy Granite Family History Center. We're pleased this evening to have Catherine Grant present to us. Her topic will be recognizing and resolving duplicates in family tree. That's a popular topic and one that we could all benefit from. Catherine is a professional instructional designer, and you may recognize her as a frequent presenter with the BYU Family History Library. She's done a number of webinars with them on a wide variety of genealogy topics. She has also recently produced a quick research basics video for the Family History Guide on English civil registration with some more to come. So we're excited to have Catherine present to us this evening. Please stay on mute. You'll be muted automatically, and then we'll reserve some time at the end of the presentation where you can ask questions and we'll open things up. So thanks again for attending, and we'll turn the time over to Catherine.
Thank you so much. And I wonder, would it be out of line for me to ask for an opening prayer? I don't know, maybe do you do that usually at these meetings? It seems like,
Actually, we used to do that, and now we are not doing that,
okay,
but we can have a prayer in our hearts for sure.
that sounds really good. I would appreciate that because it just always goes better when we have a prayer in our hearts and seek the Lord's help. So, you guys, I'm so excited to be with you today. And I know there's a number of things you could be doing on a Tuesday night. And I just want to express my gratitude that you took time to come tonight. And the prayer in my heart is that this will be valuable to you and you may be an expert in this area, and so my hope is if you're an expert in this area that you'll gain something that will help you as you teach others. And so whatever way it is, I hope that this evening will be valuable and that the Spirit of the Lord will be with us. So let's take a look at what we plan to cover in this class, and we are going to reserve time at the end for Q&A. So first of all, what are duplicates and why are they a problem? Just very briefly to get us all on the same page. And then why does correct merging matter? How can I be confident that two records should be merged? And then we're actually going to do a demo of merging duplicates. And then finally, we'll just go over some tips, tricks, and reminders. So let's go ahead and dive in. So when we talk about duplicates, what are we exactly talking about? And what's the big deal? Who cares if there's duplicates? Why is it a problem? Well, to understand why duplicates are a problem, it's important to understand what the goal is of this wonderful website, Family Search Family Tree. And the goal is ultimately to have one complete, accurate record for every person who's ever lived on the earth linked to other records or other people by correct relationships. So basically, we're trying to build a complete pedigree of the human family. And notice it did say one complete accurate record. Well, what's a duplicate in family tree? It is a record that represents the same person as another record in family tree. So here's an example. We've got Phoebe Ann Gunton. You notice that she's got a PID or an ID number, however you prefer to call that. Here it's ending in G9P and the other one ends in GHW. So we know these are right now two different people in Family Search Family Tree, but as we look at the information, we see not only does the name match, but the christening information matches. And if I were to show you the rest of the family members, they all match. So everything on these two records is identical. So, what is the trouble with duplicates? So, for instance, if I have a tree on Ancestry and Robin has a tree on Ancestry, and say that we're first cousins, and so she has a copy of our grandparents, and I have a copy of our grandparents in our separate ancestry trees. Doesn't matter, right? If you have private trees, there's no reason why you can't have as many duplicates of other people's trees as you want, but we're trying to build a shared tree. And so if you have duplicates in a shared tree, they can cause all kinds of problems. More duplicates is one. For instance, when I find a duplicate on somebody in my line, I rarely find just one duplicate, but instead that duplicate will have a duplicate wife and three or four duplicate kids and so on and so forth. So duplicates tend to snowball. One leads to another, to another, to another. They can cause duplicate research. Some duplicates are pretty hard to find. And so I might work for hours and hours building up my tree, not realizing that somebody else had already done all that research, already added all those people on a duplicate that I wasn't able to locate. We all know that duplicates can lead to duplicate temple work, which in and of itself, I remember one time I was teaching a class and one of the sisters said, and she was right, said, well, I'd rather do it twice than not do it at all. And it's better to make sure that everything's done. And she was absolutely right. But the trouble is when we do duplicate temple work, it delays work for those who really need it. So we could have been spending that time for somebody who really needed their ordinances instead of repeating ordinances that were already done. So because of these problems, obviously, Family Search allows us to merge duplicates. But there's another challenge. And that is that it's not always easy to tell whether two records really are duplicates. Incorrect merges can cause all kinds of problems too. So when Family Search was first, or excuse me, Family Tree was first rolled out in 2012, I was pretty convinced that duplicates were the biggest problem facing us as users in Family Tree. I still feel they're a significant problem, but I've actually changed my viewpoint a little bit. So let's talk about the trouble with incorrect merges. We reviewed some of the problems with incorrect duplicates. What can go wrong with if we have lots of incorrect merges? Well, they can lead to more mistakes, including more incorrect merges, till you end up with this massive bowl of spaghetti. On one of my Pringle lines, they had merged 5 different people over, I think, at least 3 generations, or excuse me, 5 different families over 3 different generations. And it literally, I think at my last count, I had undone something like 32 incorrect merges, and I'm not finished yet. And so merges tend to snowball and they can go across multiple generations, which makes them very difficult to troubleshoot. They can actually lead to more duplicates because think of it this way. If I have person A and person B and they're not the same, but they get merged, one of those people is going to be what they call the survivor, right? Their information is going to be visible, but the other person's information is kind of hidden inside that merge. So you may look and say, oh, person B, apparently they're not in family tree. I'm going to add them, which is a logical conclusion, except that person B was hidden inside person A. So bad merges lead to more duplicates. They also lead to invalid or delayed temple work. And maybe the biggest challenge, Robin and I were talking about this actually a little before we started, is that they cause a significant effort for repair. So they're really tricky to do correctly. So you have to be very meticulous and careful about untangling them. And so it is very time consuming. It's so much easier to prevent an incorrect merge than to undo one in most cases. So which causes more problems in family tree? After dealing with many, many duplicates and many, many bad merges, I've decided that it's actually the bad merges that cause the greater extent of problems rather than duplicates. They're both problems and we want to solve them, of course, but we want to be especially careful to avoid bad merges. So that leads us to the next section. How can I be confident that two records should be merged? Well, I want to borrow a metaphor from the construction industry. Measure twice, cut once. And when I shared this in one class, a sister put in the chat, she said, this also applies to quilting. So for those of you who may not be that much, maybe you don't really relate that much to construction, but you relate to quilting, kind of the same way, right? If you measure carefully up front, then you're much less likely to have a lot of rework to do. And that's what we're aiming for in our family history work. So, how can you be confident that two people should be merged? I want to share with you a little process that I follow, and it's not a foolproof formula, but rather I just want to share it with you as my friends to say, this is what I found helpful. You may find it helpful too, and you may find a variation on it to be helpful. But this is what I do when I'm trying to figure out if I should merge two people. The first thing I do is a quick sanity check of them. So I compare the information and the relationships and the sources, and I'm especially looking for signs of incorrect merges or other problems. For example, one very common flag or indication of a bad merge in family tree is somebody in England whose christening takes place before they were born. Well, the Church of England doesn't practice premortal baptism, as far as I know. In fact, I don't know of any church that practices premortal baptism or christening. So a lot of parish registers will call it baptisms. So if you see somebody getting baptized or christened before they're born, yeah, probably a bad merge in there someplace. So you look for those types of things. And then the second thing that I like to do, and we're actually going to illustrate this on a couple of cases, I like to look in the change log and see who the person was intended to be when they were created. So I scroll clear down to the bottom of the log and I look at how that person was created. Who was their original spouse? Who were their original parents? Are there any original kids? And how do those compare to what I'm seeing in Family Tree now? And if they're different, then that's also an indication that there could have been some bad merges. Then the next thing I do is I try to resolve any problems before making the final decision. And that especially applies to undoing bad merges because there's some information on if things have been badly merged, there's some information that is difficult or impossible to see without undoing the merge. So I don't want to merge two records that I know already have problems. Instead, I want to clean them up as much as possible. Then I can make the decision of whether I should really merge them or not, and I may need to do additional research. So then we come to the point of decision. Are these two records for the same human being, for the same person? And we want to be so careful to go by facts and not assumptions. Let me give you an example that I probably wouldn't have believed, except one of my fellow teachers at the BYU Family History Library gave me a screenshot of it. So somebody wrote in the reason statement for the merge, I do not believe these two people are the same, but I'm merging them to clean up the tree. So and I know, I am sure that they felt that they were doing the right thing. This is not a criticism of that user because very few of us get in Family Tree and say, oh, I'm going to mess up things on purpose. We don't do that. So I'm sure that this sister did not have that in mind to mess up Family Tree, but she made a merge knowing that it wasn't correct. And that's the kind of thing actually that we want to avoid. So we want to be sure we're paying attention to facts and not making assumptions such as I need to clean up the tree even if the merge is not correct. And even other merges like every Sarah that married a William is the same person. That's another assumption that gets made a lot and results in bad merges. So then once you've done that, you've got three options. If you determine that the two people are the same, then you go ahead and merge, no problem, right? If you determine that they're not the same, you mark them not a match. Pretty straightforward. But this is when it might get a little tricky and maybe even a little tempting to do the merge, even if we're not sure it's correct. And that is if we don't know. And we might think, well, I'm pretty sure, I'm like 75% sure, 80% sure. But you know what? Unless we're really confident, my recommendation would be not to do the merge. Again, if it was super easy to undo merges, I would say, okay, it's not as big of a deal, even though we should try to avoid it. But given the hours and hours that so many of us have spent undoing merges, I just feel like if we really aren't highly confident that the people should be merged, then it's better not to merge them. And that goes for possible duplicates because Family Tree does the best it can to tell us whether things are duplicates or not. But it's a computer, right? So it doesn't catch every possible duplicate. and it suggests possible duplicates that aren't really duplicates. So we have to do our due diligence. And also, it's especially important to go by the Spirit, because I've been warned by the Spirit when I was about to make a mistake. And I would just share that testimony with you, that if we pray to the Lord in the name of, pray to Heavenly Father in the name of Jesus Christ and ask sincerely to be kept from making mistakes, I've had that prayer answered many times, because believe me, on my own wisdom, I would make way more mistakes than I do. And I have just seen the Lord give me guidance and promptings to help me not make those mistakes that I would make with my own wisdom. So here's example one. This is Phoebe Ann Gunton. We looked at her a little bit earlier, and I wanted to go into just a little bit more detail of why we're confident these are duplicate records. So we see, whoops, sorry. I thought I had call outs on this screen. I don't. But we see that she's got the same name, same sex. She's got the same christening date, the same christening location, like everything is lining up. When we look at her parents, she was born out of wedlock. So she has an unknown father, same mother. When we look at the source, there's actually only one source, and it is for the christening that it matches all the information in Family Tree. And then when we look in the change log, we see that it's very clean. So I go down to the bottom, and I apologize that this is so small, you guys, but I wanted to illustrate that the change logs are very similar. There's really no difference in the data except for the PIDs, except for the ID numbers. So she comes into the system as the daughter of Phoebe Gunton and a placeholder father. And then same thing over here is exactly the same, comes in with the same christening record. So as we look at this record, it is super obvious that, or excuse me, as we look at these two records, it's super obvious that they represent the same person. And so we want to merge them. It's totally a slam dunk. Everything lines up. Here is another example that is not as obvious. And I don't know about you, but I learn more when I can actually see things in practice rather than somebody just giving me a list of principles. And so that's one reason that I wanted to walk through this other example, so that you can kind of, if you haven't done this type of thing, I know some of you have done this before, but if you haven't done this type of thing before, this will be a good way to kind of walk through the thought process of how you can tell whether two people are duplicates or not. So Family Tree suggested a possible duplicate for Ruth Greenwood. Let's take a look. So you remember from our little process, the first thing we want to do is just kind of sanity check these people and get familiar with them. So this Ruth is born in November of 36 in Ripponden, Halifax, Yorkshire. Look when she was christened. She was christened on Christmas Day. I think that is so cool. And I can just imagine how joyous that family was to have a child christened on Christmas Day. So that's her basic vital information. And then we take a look at her family. She's got a spouse named James Schofield, who was born in 35 in Oldham, Lancashire, and he is an innkeeper. And I found that it's helpful to pay attention to occupations when they're given, because that can help us sometimes sort duplicates, tell whether they're really the same or not. The children are all born in either Hollinwood or Oldham, Lancashire. And then, of course, we see that she's got parents, Greenwood and Hannah Sutcliffe. When I look at the sources, they all look good. I don't see any sources that don't seem to apply to her. So again, remember, this is just sanity checking. I'm just kind of very quickly, I honestly don't spend more than maybe 5, 10 minutes max on this if I need to dig into the sources. But at this point, I'm just getting to know the person, looking for any obvious red flags. For this Ruth, I don't see any. And then I go into the change log, and the change log is clean, and it matches all the information that I see on her person page, that she was christened on Christmas Day. She's the daughter of William and Hannah and the wife of James. So I feel good about this record. I don't see any cleanup that I need to do before a merge is potentially done. So now I want to look at the other Ruth. What do you guys notice first off about this Ruth, about her vital information? And if you want, you can throw it in the chat, but probably everybody's looking at this and going, there, what about the vital information? There isn't any. So she's got no birth, she's got no christening, she's got no death date, she doesn't even have a last name. When we look at her relationships, she's got a husband named James Schofield. So that's the first kind of substantial piece of information that is saying, oh, now I'm seeing why these two people could possibly be the same. So she's got the spouse, but guess what? He has no vital information. And she's got a daughter named Lavinia. She's christened in 71 in Morley, Yorkshire. Now, unless you guys have photographic memories, I'm guessing that you probably don't remember all those other kids because I don't even remember all of them. And I've worked on this case. So I thought it would be helpful in a second. We're going to do a side-by-side comparison, but don't worry if you don't remember the other stuff because we're going to look at it. But as I look at the source, I see that there's one source and it is for the christening and all the information matches up. So the sources are good. No problems in the change log. The change log indicates that Ruth was intended to be the wife of James Schofield and the mother of Lavinia. So everything is looking good. I don't see messes on these records, but I do see missing information for Ruth and James. So here's the little comparison that I mentioned. So our original Ruth Greenwood is born in 1836 in Halifax, Yorkshire. Her husband's in 35, Oldham, Lancashire, and here are the kids. Well, there's not a Lavinia, but looking at when Lavinia was born, could she fit in this family? Yeah, it's possible she could fit right here between 66 and 73. What's up with the Morley, Yorkshire? Well, yeah, it doesn't match Lancashire. It doesn't match Oldham and Hollinwood, but look back where Ruth Green was born. So is it possible that family went home to visit the relatives in Yorkshire and that's where Lavinia was born? It could happen. So the truth is, I keep forgetting I have these call outs, you guys. I apologize. So there's the gap. Um, and Morley, Yorkshire is actually not that far away. Let me get my video out of here. So it's not like hundreds of miles away. 35 miles back in the 1800s, that was a fair distance to travel, but it's not like it's, a couple hundred miles. So it's iffy. So we don't have any absolute contradictions, but we don't have definite proof. And so my recommendation here is that we're not ready to merge on this family. We need something a little more substantial to convince us that these two Ruths are really the same person. So how can we get that? So I find it helpful to formulate a question to guide my research because if I just say, is Ruth the same as Ruth? I don't know. It's like it's not it's not specific enough to guide my efforts. So I try to formulate a question that will help me. And what I need to do is I want to figure out, is Ruth, the mother of Lavinia, the same person as Ruth, the mother of the Lancashire children? Because that will give me definite proof. If I can establish that the same woman had Lavinia and the same woman had all those other kids, then we're good. So what could we check to determine this? Well, since this is in England, I'll give examples of English records, but you can use the principles that we're talking about to apply to different countries like Mexico, where there's Catholic records, or Canada, or wherever else you might be researching. So in England, there are three records we could check. One is Lavinia's christening record because it may have a birth date and it may have a father's occupation. And we know that the original Ruth's husband was an innkeeper. So if this guy's an innkeeper, that's more evidence. We can also try to find Lavinia in the census with the other kids. If she's with all those kids and they're all listed as children of the couple, that's another great piece of evidence that they belong together in the same family. And then finally, maybe the most valuable one because it's specific is to find Lavinia's birth registration and find out whether what her mother's maiden name is, because we know our original Ruth has a maiden name of Greenwood. So does Lavinia's mother have Greenwood? If so, we can merge them. So I looked and looked and looked and looked to try and find any evidence of Lavinia in the census. Couldn't find her, couldn't find a birth registration. All I could find was this christening, and I'm embarrassed to say that it took me a long time to look at the image. Now, the handwriting is not particularly clear. We've got December 17th of 71, Lavinia, James and Ruth, Schofield, Morley. We'd already seen that. And there's the vicar's name. But what do you guys see on this christening record that accounts for me not being able to find her? If you said that she was christened as a 15-year-old, you're absolutely right. This is unusual in England, but not unheard of. So I learned a good lesson here that I should have looked at the image instead of wasting all that time looking based on an incorrect birth date. So she was really born about 1856. That changes quite a bit of our both our research and where she fits in the family. So once I found out when she was really born, it was actually quite easy to find her in the census because Lavinia Schofield is a pretty unusual name. It's not Jane Smith or Susan Taylor. So look what we see here. We see Lavinia in the census, and her mother is listed as a sister to the head of household, George Firth. Lavinia is listed as a niece. So what does that tell us that Ruth, the mother of Lavinia's maiden name, probably is? Now, it's not absolute positive yet, but it's pretty strong evidence. So then we look at her in the 1871 census. There she is. Her mom's not with her anymore, but she's living with her grandfather. And look at his surname. So oops, sorry, went too fast there. Um, he is also a Firth. So it's now looking very, very likely that Lavinia's mother's maiden name is Firth, not Greenwood. And to confirm that, we can go to the GRO site, which stands for General Register Office, where they list the mother's maiden name. And lo and behold, Lavinia's mother's maiden name is Firth. So even though Family Search recommended those records to be merged, just a little bit of research. I mean, we walked through this in what? I don't know, 10, 15 minutes in this presentation. Took me a little bit longer when I did it because I had the wrong birth date. But if I'd looked at the christenings sooner, it would have gone a lot faster. I guess the point that I'm making is for a minimal investment of effort, I was able to avoid a bad merge. So that takes us to our demo. And I'm going to switch screens over here. And because we just walked through an example, we're not going to research this Thomas Clow. I already researched him and I know that this duplicate that we're going to look at is a duplicate. The purpose of this part of the presentation is just to walk through some best practices when you're merging people. So we are going to click on possible duplicate here and click review merge. And I should ask you guys, can you see my family tree screen? Sometimes I only share one window accidentally. I should open the chat. If you can't, okay, Julie says you can see it. Cool. So just wanted to make sure because sometimes I've been talking away and finally someone says, we don't know what you're talking about because we can't see your screen. So the first step of doing a merge is to just look through this screen where the two people are presented side by side and see how well the information matches up. But I wanted to make a comment that I have found to be true more often than not, and that is that this page often does not provide enough information to tell if these people are the same. So I always recommend doing extra sanity checking. Well, not always, but like 98% of the time, you'll find that it's a good idea to just find them in the census if you can, or look at the christening image, or check the father's occupations, or whatever it might be, just to do that little bit of due diligence to be comfortable that they're really the same person. So before this presentation, I did that. And as you look at this, you might have wondered the same thing that I did. So we've got a guy with the same name. He's christened on the same date, but we've got a little discrepancy here. One is Walton in Instye. I have no idea how to pronounce that. And the other is Walton near Weatherby. Probably they're the same, but you know what? I knew I would feel better if I just Google mapped it really quickly. Well, come to find out, and I think I looked at like a wiki, a family search wiki page. So come to find out that Instye, sorry you guys, I should have looked up the pronunciation, that is a wapentake, which is we're not going to get into the whole what is that in England. You could Google it if you're interested. It was actually kind of interesting, but it's just a larger geographical area. So Walton is inside Ainstay, but it is also about 2.5 miles from Weatherby. So when I looked at those and I saw that everything else lined up, the name, the christening date, the parents' names, the brother, the date of the brother, or excuse me, no, that's him. Um, Sorry, that's not a brother, but the parents' names lined up. I felt very, very comfortable that these two people should be merged because they represent the same person. So I go to continue. And then here, what happens on this screen is that everything gets moved over to the surviving person. So that's the person on the right, except for conflicting information. So this christening place, you notice the christening information did not get moved over. So if I decide, I do some research and I decide this is a more accurate location, then I would have to make that change manually. I'd have to make it after the merge. And that gives me the opportunity to bring up something that people always ask about. Can I correct this right in the merge? And the family search has made it not possible to edit during a merge. And I think honestly, that was a really smart thing to do, because if we had people editing stuff in the middle of a merge, then does that change that they should be merged? And you know what I mean? It's just, it seems like it would cause too many issues to allow editing during a merge. So you have to edit either before or after, but not during. So you can't, the conflicting information is not transferred over, but everything else is. The duplicate parents are transferred over, the source is transferred over. So then we come to continue. Now, this is a place where I'm going to say something that could potentially be a little bit controversial, but I've thought through it really carefully, and I'll give a good reason for why I am going to make the recommendations that I do. But all of us, we need to do what we feel best about, right? So I'm not announcing a policy or anything. I'm just giving recommendations based on my experience. So within the last, I don't know, 6 months or something, Family Search added these canned reason statements. On the surface, that sounds like a really good idea. The trouble is, these four reason statements are never, well, not never, they're not going to be true about 99.9% of the time. About the only time this one is true that everything matches is on that, like a christening example. And but the other problem is, even if everything does match, this doesn't say what matches. And what's interesting is that every time I've seen somebody use this reason statement, everything didn't match. So the year, I'll just off the top of my head, one time the year was off, another time the last name was different. And so what concerns me is that people just go, oh, okay, whatever, pick one, click add, and there you go. It's in the reason statement box, and there we go. And I talked to somebody at Family Search and they said, well, one of the reasons we did this is because people would skip the reason statement, or they just put same person, which I agree is not tremendously helpful, because the reason you're merging them is because you think they're the same person. So to say they're the same person isn't very enlightening. Like, it doesn't tell anyone who comes along later, why you decided to merge. So I will show you what I have started to do for reason statements. And I've been glad I've done it because you may be aware that these reason statements end up in the change log. So another person can come to the change log and see why you made the merge. Well, one time I did a merge and then I don't know, 4 years passed or something, and I got back to the merge. Do you think I had any recollection of why I did that merge? Nope, it was gone. It was long gone. I didn't even remember my research very well on that family, but I had put in a good reason statement. And so when I looked at the reason statement, I was like, okay, good. I I am confident now that I thought through this and I this was a good merge. So let me show you what I do. One thing I love about these canned reason statements is they pop in the PIDs. So you don't have to type them or copy them in, which can be a little bit tedious. So what I do is I just pick any of these. It doesn't matter which because I'm going to edit it. And then I take out everything but the PIDs. And then I build a sentence that explains why I believe these two people are the same. So I'm going to say Thomas Clough. Actually, I don't know if it's Clough or Clough. So let's just say Clough. Thomas Clough, and there's the first PID. And then Thomas Clough, the second one, and again, we're building a sentence. And then I would say the key reasons that I believe these people to be the same. So Thomas and Thomas were christened on the same date in the same location. And I might want to take time to explain the Walton thing, but I think in the interest of time on our class tonight, I'm not going to, because actually it was really easy to find they were the same by looking it up on Google Maps. So they were christened on the same date in the same location and had the same parents, John and Anne. It was John and Anne, right? Oop, I better check. Yep, John and Anne. So, do you see how this is such a simple reason statement, but it gives the three key reasons that I am convinced these two records represent the same person: same christening date, same christening location, and same parents. So then I feel comfortable that if somebody else comes along, they will understand what I did. And if I happen to do it wrong, then at least they know what I did so that they can fix it and make it better. So I'm going to do finish merge. And here's a cool little thing is if you merge somebody and then you suddenly go, oh, I don't think I should have done that, then you could click undo really quickly and it will undo your merge. And then also inside the change lock, there will be an undo button until the first change is made after the merge. And then after that, the unmerge button goes away. So that is an example of a merge. And the next thing that we wanted to do was flip back over to the presentation and kind of go through some tips, tricks, and reminders. And let me see how we're doing on time here. Okay, good. I think we'll be wrapped up with this last section in about the next 5 to 7 minutes, and then we'll spend however much time everybody wants on questions. So, just to repeat what I said earlier, don't rely on the information on these pages when deciding whether or not to merge. They often don't show enough information to decide. So just do some simple sanity checking first. Information can't be edited during the merge. To edit the information, change it before or after the merge. Information on the right is kept. That's called the surviving person. And information on the left ends up, they call it deleted, but that's a little bit misleading because if you know this PID here, this L4XP XP6, you can actually look up a deleted person. They're not going to show up in a search. So in a regular search, you would not see this person that was merged. But if you do a find by ID and put in that ID, you will get the deleted person page. So really, probably archived is a better word because that information doesn't go away. It just is hidden in most cases unless you search for it directly. If you want to move information from the person to be archived to the surviving person, you just click replace. Most of the time, you don't need to do that because much of the information is moved over automatically. And about the only time I'm trying to look at this. Actually, this is identical. So I was going to say it's only not moved over if it conflicts, but this screenshot shows me that I made a misstatement and I apologize. So I know that it's not moved over if it conflicts, but it also looks like some of the vital information may not be automatically moved over, and you have the choice, particularly if it's different, to move that information over to the surviving person. Here's a cool feature. If you decide, like, suppose you get in here and you realize that the person to be deleted or archived has all the good information and the surviving person didn't, and you just thought, I'd really rather keep this other original record that had all the relationships already there, then you can hit switch. The honest truth is, it doesn't matter in the long run because all the information ends up on the surviving person. I'll tell you honestly, one reason that I sometimes do this, that I switch people, is that you can tell something about a record from the ID number. And I say that with some hesitancy. Let me explain what I mean by that. Family Search does not assign PIDs to mean anything. So like an L doesn't mean anything or a K doesn't mean anything, but they did assign PIDs sequentially, and often they would assign them to similar types of records. So what I found over the years is that Ks were often membership records, PIDs starting with Ks. Sometimes they would be user contributed records. Ls were used at the end of New Family Search and until 2018 in Family Tree. So if I see an L or a K or some other letters, not to go into a huge long thing about that, but I know those are older records. Family Search started PIDs with Gs in about October, I want to say October of 2018. I know it was 2018. So it was fall of 2018 when G's started to be used. So if you see something that starts with a G, then you know that that record was created fairly recently within the last couple of years. So that's a reason that I might switch them, but that is absolutely not necessary, not required in any sense. So it's really up to you as to whether you want to switch the survivor with the person to be deleted. This is a fairly new development. By new, I mean, gosh, maybe in the last year or so, is that everything is moving. Okay, you guys, here I had the answer to my question and I didn't even realize it because I asked somebody at Family Search about this. So everything is moved to the right except vital information. That's why that information wasn't moved over that we looked at, the birthplace, and conflicting relationships. So if there's like a conflict, one example that comes to mind is I remember seeing a person with the same husband, but conflicting marriage dates. So when that happened, that relationship was considered to be conflicting and it was not moved over. But these relationships down here of the spouse and the child, there were no conflicts. So Family Search moved them over to the survivor, but they marked them green so that they're very easy to see that something's been moved over. So there's a spouse that's been moved over, the sources that are moved over will be colored green, etc. So it's really easy to tell. You do have the option to undo, but I have almost never used that. It just most of the time you want the information on the surviving person. About the only reason you wouldn't is if you knew that information was wrong. And then, of course, you could click undo and scoot it back, like if it was a bad source and you didn't want it attached to the survivor. This is another thing that comes up quite often. People, especially people that are starting out. So those of you who help other people, you could be prepared for this question. They'll say, "Oh, when I merge this person, aren't all these other people, all the other family members merged too?" And no, Family Search doesn't merge them. They all have to be done individually, I also think that's very wise because can you imagine how mistakes would multiply if people did multiple merges at a time? It would just be too hard to keep straight, in my estimation. So, very rightly, Family Search just merges the two people that are at the top of the screen, the ones that you originally thought were duplicates and were merging. So duplicate spouses and children are not merged as part of this merge. Oh, this is an example of not exactly um, conflicting information, but missing. I guess it could be considered conflicting. But here we've got Eliza, and she has a spouse of James. This Eliza does too. But this Eliza has a marriage date. This Eliza doesn't have one. Or, like in our example earlier, it could be a conflicting date. So if you hit replace, especially for a person that has no marriage information, it's going to erase the information you already have. So that's one thing to be careful of is anytime you hit replace, this is going to totally take the place of this and it will be removed. It will be overwritten. Canned reason statements, we talked about that. They can be a good start, but they virtually always need to be edited. My screen is not advancing. I'm clicking advance. Oh, and I just want to point out this one is almost never true because almost never does everything match. So you only want to use it if it really is true. And the other thing to consider is that after you make the merge, other users can change vital information and relationships. So to say everything matches is not helpful for that reason because it can be changed later on. So everything matches. What exactly matches? Minor conflicts, I would say if you're seeing minor conflicts, those are often red flags that there's been a bad merge. So probably you would, if you felt like you wanted to use this reason statement, that would be a reason to go back and do more research and resolve the minor conflicts before doing merge. This one, oh, I've got to admit, this one makes me cringe. So this record contains little information. There is enough evidence to believe it's the same person. So I guess the question that comes to my mind is if there's only little information, how can you tell that it's the same person? So I'd be really cautious about using this one. This one's probably the most, this one will be accurate in some cases, but again, it doesn't tell why you did the merge. It doesn't say the key reasons that you knew that person was the same. So remember that the reason statement becomes part of the change log, and once it's there, it can't be edited. So you want to provide something that's going to help you and other users. So just again, a little example here, similar to the one I did before. A good reason statement explains just the key facts that led you to believe that those two records represent the same person. Doesn't have to be long or complicated. And because names can change as other people make changes and so forth, I also like to indicate the full name at the time of the merge and the PID at the time of the merge. Additional considerations, just really quickly before we open up for questions. Know your families. Do accurate and reasonably complete research. We're not talking about years of trying to, find every possible detail in every possible record, but just reasonable research to where you're confident that the merge is correct. So look for birth, marriage, and death information, relationships such as parents, spouse, and children. You can use a research log like the timeline grid. We're not going to go into that in this class, but this is a link. And at the end of the class, I'm going to paste a link to this presentation in the chat. And then you'll have this presentation for future reference if you would like it. And you can click this link to get more information on the timeline grid. It's just a very simple research log. Be cautious when duplicates are likely. For instance, if you're dealing with family records from the IGI. If you're not familiar with the IGI, you can go to the BYU Family History Library webinar page, and we've got a webinar that explains it. And then also be careful if you're dealing with extracted records. They created a lot of duplicates. Extraction is the old indexing program. If you're prior to the late 1800s in most countries, you're going to have a higher chance of duplicates. And then also be especially careful with common names like Brown, Taylor, Smith, or if you're in Hispanic research, Gonzalez, De La Vega, names that are used frequently, and especially common first names. You got Miguel or you've got John. Be super careful with names that are commonly used and that could very likely not be the same person. And even with uncommon names. Okay, has anybody ever heard the name Alexander Entwistle? I had not before I started helping one of my friends with her family history, but guess what? Once we started working on her Entwistle line, we probably found about a dozen Alexander Entwistles. So once a family likes a name, they're very likely to keep using it over the generations and even across generations. You can find cousins with the same unusual name. In some cultures, children receive the same name as a deceased older sibling. So it pays to be cautious there. And again, when in doubt, don't merge. You can save a lot of grief that way. So, to summarize, we talked about what duplicates are, why they're a problem, why correct merging matters, how you can be confident that two records should be merged. We did our little demo and we did some tips, tricks, and reminders. So, everybody, thank you so much for joining us, and we'll go ahead and open it up for questions.
Thank you.
Thank you for mentioning that. Yeah, you're
No
very
problem.
welcome.
Catherine, we are so grateful for you presenting this evening. Lots of great information that hopefully will save all of us a lot of time, but we'll invest the time in substantiating our research and being a little more careful and preventing and avoiding duplicates, I'm sure. I just
Great.
wanted to mention next Tuesday, James Tanner will be presenting Tuesday
Oh,
evening,
he's
beginning
awesome.
research in the United Kingdom. So be sure to mark that on your calendar next Tuesday, 7 p.m. Mountain Time.